Hi, and welcome to another episode of eCom at One. And today's guest is Kirk Williams, the owner of Zato, an e-commerce PPC agency based out of Montana. How you doing, Kirk? You okay?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Well, no problem at all. Looking forward to getting into one of my sort of topics that I spend a lot of time myself involved in. Obviously, as a couple of agencies here around the podcast, I'm really looking forward to getting into some stuff with you. So I've got to ask, how did you become one of the top 25 most influential PPCers from 16 to 20? Tell me about that.
Probably Twitter and comedy, I think. It might be it. I started on Twitter, and I actually remember having a conversation with my wife. I mean, this is probably like 7-8 years ago. And I think she was very, very loving, very supportive. But I think you sure spent a lot of time on Twitter for starting a business, and part of it for me was saying, man, this is where I'm finding my people, forming networks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we've really just seen that kind of help take off, and trying to do that on LinkedIn as well. But some of what I became known for on Twitter was memes, different memes. And I've done various fun things like singing. I'll do marketing song parodies and stuff like that. So I think you got to keep it light, So Google keeps changing everything all the time. So if you can't laugh, you're not going to survive in this business.
I love it. So I think guys listening in, you got to go and check out Kirk's social for a little bit of light comedy, but also obviously some great content as well amongst it all as well. So obviously e-commerce, we're on the e-commerce eCom at One podcast. So great to have you on the show. What would you say, in your opinion, should every e-commerce store run PPC campaigns? Should there be any exceptions, or should all e-com stores be running PPC?
Yeah, so I think with most things in marketing, the phrase "it depends" fits pretty well. I definitely see if you step back, I see PPC as more of that demand capture side, not demand creation, right? And there are different ways that people will put it. But basically what you're doing with paid search, especially, and that even is one of those things, right? Because PPC more and more can kind of mean a lot of things. Yeah. If you're thinking paid search marketing, so advertising your products on Google, right? Google or Microsoft or Bing, then that's really picking up demand that currently exists. Because at some point someone has to have that thought in their brain, which transfers into their voice for their phone or their fingers for their typing, right? And so in a lot of ways, paid search, I would argue there is a top of funnel aspect that can go along with paid search. A lot of times though, we'll build that out in our own accounts with display marketing as well as YouTube. And then we also will really encourage brands to be looking at things like social as well, Facebook, that sort of thing. But in terms of paid search marketing, you really do need to have that interest already. And then you need that's where then you can place the ads, you find the keywords, work with Google to determine what those are, and then advertise for that. So it does depend. It does depend. There are certain industries that are going to be very expensive, especially maybe someone new entering, where, the top 6 people bidding are, or at least in the US, huge retailers like Home Depot and Walmart, and then you have Amazon, things like that, right? If you're entering a highly competitive, high auction space and you just don't have a lot of money, then sometimes it might not make sense to at least start there. Most of the time, what we have found is any sort of established business has some sort of presence typically. Oftentimes it's more probably the beginning brands who are first starting out, where they might not necessarily first start out with paid search. So
no, I think that's very relatable. I think if you're starting out and you've got a limited budget, and you're testing things, you're testing the business, let alone paid ads potentially, then you've got to make other things work potentially first to make sure you've got the budgets. But obviously, as you say, the demand is there. If the demand is there, which there is in, the depends bit comes in the fact that most products there is a demand for, especially on branded SKUs and known products. So yeah, great. So obviously working on a lot of PPC campaigns over the years. I see you've been doing this since about 2009-ish, which is a long time. It's like PPC years are like It's like 30 years really, instead of the 11, 12 years, all the different changes and whatnot. But maybe talk us through some campaigns that you've worked on and some of the things that you've done more recently that have had the best results. What's working well now?
Yeah. So a lot of what I've done in terms of actual content, not just bad, dumb jokes, but in terms of actual content, a lot of what I've done is on the shopping ad side. So like Google Shopping. And I've spoken a lot, written stuff. And that historically has been for us just really strong with ecom. And we've just seen that continue to grow in strength.
Yeah.
Especially in terms of spend. I think Google and Microsoft keep pushing more of their search engine result pages, their SERPs, to have shopping ads that used to not. So there's just more availability than there used to be. And so we're definitely seeing more and more brands doing more with shopping than they had in the past.
Yep.
But in the past for us, like some real basic advanced strategies had worked with the standard shopping. So there were things like the query filtering that just really worked. I mean, I remember there was like this sweet spot in there of a couple of years where people still weren't doing much of anything unique with shopping. And we would go in, and we did this with some decent sized brands and saw like just insane changes. Like I think one we saw like 200% growth in like the first 30 days. I mean, it was, and this was an established brand. I mean, it was pretty crazy, but that's because we would go in there, we'd segment out their brand, we'd segment out their non-brand, we'd find some queries in the middle, and then we target those, and no one else was doing stuff like that, right? A lot of people do that, although not always. We still see that work, but then it's changing. So smart shopping now is new in the shopping ads realm, especially for ecom.
Yep.
And I've actually written a course on that, videoed a course on that on Udemy, and we've tried to invest a lot into that because I see smart shopping not at a place where I love it because it hides a lot of data, which again is not a great place for someone really new starting. Like if you're just starting out and you push a smart shopping campaign live, like you don't get any search term data or audience data or anything like that from that. So you just need to be aware of that. So we usually like a hybrid approach, but we're finding a lot of if we do a hybrid approach where we're kind of messing with it and really trying to figure out custom labels with smart shopping, really just trying to do some cool things, we've really seen smart shopping also work very, very well these days. So we're just kind of trying to test everything and keep up with, with the machines, the platforms.
So are you still so you've obviously got the smart shopping option, and then you've got, if you like, the traditional option where you'd use maybe the filters. And with the filters, you mean, so creating the same campaign for the same products, but using the priorities and using negative keywords.
Yes.
That, yeah, which is obviously does still work very well, I believe.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So have you got a preference of the two? Are you a big opponent or proponent of smart shopping? Are you sort of flying the flag for smart shopping, are you saying, or what's your sort of preference?
I still like using both of them. I do think it's funny because some people who have followed some of my recent stuff who don't know me very well from my old stuff might think of me as flying the flag just because I've put out a lot of stuff recently on smart shopping. I see that less as flying the flag and more as self-preservation, to be honest.
Okay.
Because I really do think that that's where Google's heading. I mean, you have things like, I've been told by Googlers that the standard shopping and smart shopping are built on different code bases. They have completely different engineering teams. It's a very redundant thing.
Yeah.
And typically redundancy in mega tech corporations doesn't last very long. So we'll see, but some of that is me trying to learn as much as I can, in some ways to identify what is good and what works well and be a proponent of that. And then I've also been trying to speak back into Google as much as I can, just letting them know some of the weaknesses in terms of data loss, why we want the data back, that sort of thing, hoping by the time they make the switch that we'll get some of that back so that the product will be a little more user-friendly.
Yeah. So smart shopping specifically then, obviously we refer to it as like the black box, a bit of a mystery in there. We don't really know the specifics of what's getting adjusted, etc. We just know the outcome is X, the ROAS, the conversion values, etc. But when you step back from it, obviously there are some things that you can do in the setup phase. And so what would be maybe a couple of recommendations you would give to our listeners that are doing smart shopping, that want to sort of tune it and take it up a notch? What are some recommendations you would have there? Maybe something in the feed or...
Yeah, so definitely, because smart shopping is so conversion based, in terms of directly track conversions, right? You just really got to make sure your conversions are just locked down. I mean, your tracking has to be on target. You got to make sure you're tracking that stuff well, and that that's being passed into Google correctly. So that's probably one of the most important things, just simply because this an automated system is built on that, and that's one of the most significant inputs you have. Um, in terms of like what we can do as well, I do think that product feed optimization is pretty important. And so being able to communicate to Google what these products are about, and that's what the feed is for. So making sure your titles, descriptions, and all that is filled out well. Product type is one that I often see missed. I often see that not even used in brands. And Google has basically communicated on different calls we've had that they see product type different than they did a few years back. And that coincided with, like, I don't remember when, it might be 2 years now, when they had, so we still have Google product category, which is different than product type. That can be confusing.
Yeah.
Google product category used to be required, and it's not required anymore. That was a little bit of a soft thing. They just kind of like made it not required. And that coincided with when I was told, like, all of a sudden Google's looking at product type more purposefully, because what they're saying is, hey, we now see that this is you, the brand, communicating to us. This is how you see your products in their hierarchical structure. So that it's giving them this contextual information, because again, the machines take every little bit of data input that they can grab onto to try to find then that user, right?
Yeah.
And so definitely things like that I think are really important. And then organizing the campaigns and putting those in smart shopping campaigns purposefully, I think is another thing that can get missed. Not simply just grabbing a smart shopping campaign, throwing it up with all your products with a half-hearted branding ad, But really, what I like to tell people who like take my course in that would be, really thinking through matching like your different product groupings in terms of who would be purchasing them, because then you're starting to think more audience centered, even as you're thinking about how you're organizing your products, and then putting those into a campaign together, and then having this ad, smart shopping ad, because you can put creative in there and assets, putting all that together. So you have these products that will reach similar people, and that kind of gives Google better, again, like, helps train the machine just a little bit better. Like, these are the people we're going after, not just throwing it out there. So those are some things that we like to do.
That's fantastic, Kirk. I think so many times you look at a feed and they're using categories only. Straight away, just adding those product types in there, which give you that flexibility to obviously call them what you want, name them what you want, that can then quite often mirror the website navigation to make it easy to build the campaign structures. Whereas the categories are very fixed, and quite often products are in a category, but it's not quite the right category. So with it being a product type, you can call them what you want, put the products in the right product types, rather than a near fit maybe. So yeah, I think that's one we see a lot. So I would say anybody listening right now, maybe pause this episode and just kind of look at your feed. There's a few things there to check, that do you have them? Don't you have them? What should you be adding in there? Because quite often that is the first thing we find as well when we're looking in a product feed straight away, product types, labels, etc., not being used. So yeah, have a little look. Right. So obviously a lot of campaigns, many years on the interface and working with a lot of different brands. What's the sort of one mistake, one thing that you see consistently? Maybe in shopping, I think would be, and or search, but I think while we're on the topic of shopping, because it is a hot topic on the podcast, what's the one thing you see as a mistake quite consistently?
Yeah, product type would be one that I would normally call out in that question, because we do often see it ignored. Another thing that I often see is a failure to segment out brand and non-brand. And so I think that's important. I think it kind of goes to a bigger philosophical picture of what you're trying to do in the PPC account. Like sometimes people make the mistake of making PPC too tactical. It's too much about spreadsheets and bidding and things like that, right? But I think there still is this element of marketing strategy in that needs to work into your PPC account. And one of the kind of clearest and simplest ways is just if you have users that you have advertised to somehow before. I mean, I don't care. Like your email, Facebook, your other mid or top of funnel PPC campaigns, whatever it is, your brand traffic is someone that somehow you have reached through some level of marketing or PR or something, right? Which costs money, as we all know. And so in that way, keeping your warm audiences segmented out from your cold audiences in the account, I think is really, really important. Yep. It allows you to have different messaging. It allows you to bid differently because you want to bid differently, because you actually want to spend less for those brand visits. And that's typically why, I mean, you can take certain shots that are very fair at Google, but some of the things that I think are great is like the way that they have done quality score in its own way is a decent thing. And one of the things with quality score is that impacts what you pay. And that tends to mean, like, for your brand terms, you're really not paying much at all. I mean, you're paying, I was going to say cents because that would be our dollars. Let's see, pounds and pence, would it be? Is that? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. So you're paying just very minimal typically for your brand stuff, but that's a reason. It's because you've spent money on them already. And you're okay having, different ROAS targets and that for your top of funnel, your cold audiences and all that. So I think that's one of those things that you often will go into account and see that you can tell they're just really not thinking about that at all. They're just kind of throwing a couple of campaigns up and seeing what happens. And I think that's probably one of the most common mistakes we see.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's great advice. Great advice. So on the podcast, a lot of our listeners, I think the magic word is scale. Everyone's looking to scale in some way or other, whether they're, wherever they are. Obviously they want to be, there's always a next level and a next step, whether you're doing 10 million a month or $1 million a month or 100 million a month, whatever it may be. But typically, so what do you think would be the best advice you can give to somebody that wants to scale? What should they focus on? If they're doing, they're doing that, let's say, they're at that sort of maybe 20 grand spend, getting a 200,000 return in a month, 20 grand spend, 200 grand back. What are some of the levers, some of the things they should be looking at to really then go, right, we want to double up, we want to triple up. This is the $1 million question, isn't it? What would be the things you'd recommend to look at?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I have an answer that probably not many will like. So we've seen a number of accounts. We've seen real small accounts who are scaling in their own way, some who aren't scaling. We've seen very large accounts. I've talked to others. So we have a very small agency. We don't have thousands of accounts whipping through us on an annual basis. Sometimes that's nice because you can get, aggregated information, right? Yeah. But from what I've seen, so you can take this or leave this. From what I've seen, the brands that actually scale, they're the ones who figured it out, right? The ones who actually are able to just somehow print money. It is like one of the things that I see every single time. It is just consistent across the board. And yet, like, not many people do this. And I think it's because it's hard. The thing that I see that is consistent across the board is that they are able to pull themselves out of this obsession with, like, directly tracked everything on a channel by channel basis. And they've typically hired someone who, whoever this person might be, maybe it's a CMO, maybe it's just a director of marketing, maybe it's the owner. Someone on this brand typically has just almost this vision that cannot be dissuaded, even by math at times. Like this vision of, like, this is what our brand's about. and this is who we're going after, and this is how we're going to do it. And we're going to take a pile of money, and we're going to spend a pile of money on, one of those brands that might be like on this Facebook campaign, or, a lot of times it's been on YouTube. We're going to make this crazy YouTube ad, whatever. And they're not seeing that initial return. And it's just kind of this vision that they have that is just, it's going to happen. And then they hire the right people for those different channels. Mm. And so it's kind of this like, it's kind of this overall formula of this person, along with like a vision that actually is good and works, along with a great product, along with individuals who they trust at the different channel levels, who they're not like telling. I mean, there's some level of accountability, but they're just not, if we take on a smaller client and there's just this constant like focus on, hey, what happened with this keyword, right? Because all of a sudden last month it spent a little bit more than we wanted it to. And there's just kind of this concern and this obsession with that. And they just don't really have that. Because they've hired people they trust, they have their marketing vision, and they just roll with it. And again, like I said, it's not necessarily it's not a hack. It's not, not, here's the thing, you can immediately go to your account. But that seems to be what I've seen in the companies that all of a sudden are just making tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that started like you and I, Yeah.
No, I think that'll resonate with the listeners. I think there's, some good stuff there. I think obviously getting the right people on board is absolutely key, and having that visionary owner, driver is an absolute key, obviously in any business. But I think you can get bogged down in too many little ROAS details or whatever it may be. Yep. It's like there's some bigger thinking to be had. And I think quite often, I think possibly that, the person that was doing the 20 grand a month thinking is not the same person that's going to need to do the 200 grand a month thinking. So that's where team may need to be changed, or an education piece, or more of a visionary piece needs to be done within the business, and that thinking potentially just stay quite small unless you sort of step back and spend that time thinking about the bigger picture. Yeah, so great.
I just think the more that I see someone just really obsessed with directly track channel ROAS, that's just typically not going to line up with someone who ends up scaling. But I know that's really hard, especially if you're a brand and you're listening to that, because like you don't want to waste money. And then you can definitely there are definitely bad actors out there, bad agencies, bad consultants, whatever, who don't necessarily know what they're doing, who can waste money. So it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's scary.
So we've talked about shopping ads primarily, I guess, and but would you say shopping ads perform the best, or are you saying other? What would you say about the other? Search ads, DPAs, different Facebook ads? What's the sort of mix for you? Have you got like a go-to? Right, we do shopping first, and then we do search, and then we do DPA, or obviously there's some. I'm sure there's going to be some depends coming in here, but what's your take on that?
Yeah. So some of that, us as an agency, we just do, it's hard to put it in definitions, because if I say PPC, that means things different people, and paid search means different things. We do like what is in Google ads and Microsoft ads. Yeah. So we do basically like paid search, display, YouTube, that sort of thing. So we're not doing social ads. So what we see, my answer will kind of depend, and that might be different. So what we see specifically at Zato on kind of the googly side of things would be, we often will, if we take over an account, or if we build one from the beginning, we often do try to build from the bottom up, in terms of, if you think loosely in terms of the marketing funnel. So we really are trying as much as possible to hit a very evident profitability, just because that also tends to be where the low hanging fruit is, kind of the easiest hit. So we will tend to start with shopping and search, especially with brand, and then try to find those real great bottom funnel terms. So that is someone who is not searching for your brand, but for whatever reason, they're searching within your industry, and they're ready to purchase, right? Often, sometimes you're able to tell that. You do keyword research, you kind of start there, exact match, phrase match, kind of build out. And again, depending on the goals of the client too, because we might have clients who, with enough money, they've received some investments, whatever it might be, they want to build more aggressively. But we do kind of start to build out like that. And then we will add in then more of that top of funnel side on search as well. Shopping, as you know, is almost its own animal because it kind of includes all of that stuff organically. We do tend to see shopping work better.
Yep.
And so shopping is definitely one of the first things that we do, along with some of those more bottom funnel search. And then we'll kind of go from there in terms of, because that's part of what we'd like to use as the profitability that we can kind of demonstrate. And then that's part of how we try to demonstrate to the client now, like, hey, let's start using this now to keep expanding that funnel.
Yep.
That's when we'll start to go more into search, display stuff, YouTube, that sort of thing. I know others who are different. That's typically how we do it.
Yeah, what you do is exactly how we do it. Most of our clients start with shopping, and that's our recommendation 99 times out of 100. And then, right, okay, search ads using data feeds for search ads. So you've got very specific search ads, and then looking at YouTube and display and whatnot. Yeah, brilliant. So, okay, it's getting obviously more and more competitive out there. More and more people, especially this last sort of 12, 18 months. Obviously, industries and demand for a lot of SKUs, a lot of products going through the roof. What are some of the tips you would give the listeners to stand out, in shopping, in search ads? So when we see, when you're looking for those specific SKUs or brand products, you type in, obviously potential customer users typing in, seeing an ad, whether that's a search ad or a shopping ad. Anything specifically that you would recommend to try and stand out?
Yeah, I'll give an answer and then I'll give a theory. So, this is not an uncommon response in terms of focusing on product benefits, but still, like, a lot of people don't. And so what I mean by that is, instead of just splashing as much product data or even just basic what all of your competitors are saying, like free shipping, ships fast and free, right?
Yeah.
There are certain things that at this point, the vast majority of people are just doing. Hey, maybe that's different in your industry, and so great. That's a way for you to differentiate yourself. So have that. If everyone else is slow, we've seen that with parts. We've had industry where we've worked with specific retailers who sell certain parts for things. Parts tend to be very, very of an urgent based thing, right? So if your company is able to get a part to someone whose thing broke down and they desperately need to get this back up because they're losing money, then like fast shipping is one of the most important things to them, more than price. And so again, like, that's where you're aware of what's happening, but that's where you're bringing benefits into your ads and not just simply facts. So you basically are kind of getting into the brains of your customers. You got to know your industry, know your audience, and figure out what is it that actually people want. And then you're presenting the benefits in the ad. So I think that's just one of the ways that we still don't do very well overall in PPC. And I think that we can just always grow better at presenting product benefits well, primarily in your headlines. Different studies have shown that descriptions in text ads these days more and more are just not really read that much. So definitely, like, getting as much as possible as important benefits into your headlines, grabbing those clicks. And then just kind of more of a theory, something that I'm thinking more and more on is, you look at how e-com is evolving as an industry, right? Over the last 20 years. And a lot has changed. This is not an easy industry, even though it keeps expanding, which is really cool. And that helps. But Amazon is the beast, right? Amazon now begins, most e-com product searches now begin on Amazon as opposed to Google. And so you have stuff like that. And now we're looking at some massive privacy changes as well that's going to impact tracking. So I was talking to someone recently and telling them, man, I remember helping small retailers advertise, because even a brand and retailer can be a little different. A brand, there's a way that, hey, this is their product, they've made this, they're connecting. You can still have your brand voice and your story and market that well. Retailers, it's like getting even harder, like retailers and drop shippers, right? Like, what differentiates you? Well, I mean, fast shipping, free shipping, pricing. Okay, well, Amazon does that. What else? And now, so what we used to be able to do with PPC, and I'm sure you remember this as well, is a lot of times that meant, hey, we're good PPCers, so we could take those smaller brands, and it was like we could do the cool PPC things and like find those auctions and opportunities that some of these massive retailers like Walmart and Amazon just they don't have the time. There's no way they could possibly do that on just millions and millions and millions with all the money. And so they have more of the big play of just like spend the money and push that. And so we'd find those opportunities with very, very targeted advertising. That is starting to possibly, begin to disappear as well. And so I think that, small retailers, I'm not saying like it's doom and gloom. I do think that small retailers probably need to really be aware of what's happening and really be thinking through, like, how can I position myself, and what does that look like? Like, you might need to consider really leaning into a specific niche of, hey, we're now the retailer that sells this specific thing, and then become trusted with that, with your content and all that. Like, you might need to really push towards community.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to win the day anymore with, we already knew at this point, because Amazon, you weren't going to win the day with pricing and shipping. And at this point, you're probably not going to win the day anymore with targeted advertising, as well, as things get more muddied.
Yeah.
So how are you going to win the day? And I think small retailers right now should be desperately asking that question.
Yeah, that is fantastic, Kirk. Thank you for that. That's a really good, I think that's a really cracking answer. I would say pause and just rewind maybe like 5 minutes and just let that sink in. I think there's some great takeaways there. I think obviously there's a lot of battles out there that are really tough. So creating that brand side of things and, that community aspect, and winning the war, all about that battle slightly differently, and really honing in on a specific, real tight knit group of products, rather than maybe these 50,000 SKUs that you're going after left, right, and center with no real focus potentially. Yeah. So, right, last few questions, Kirk. Time is flying by. Okay, I know we touched on the scaling side of things, but let's say, right, the listeners they're jumping into their ad accounts while we're on this episode. What are some of the things you would recommend they should go and look at in the ad accounts to improve performance specifically? What's your sort of go-to? You got specific sort of columns, and I don't know, I'll leave it with you, but without giving too much away. But what would your go-to sort of tips be to have a look at and improve performance in the interface?
Yeah. So let's say someone is maybe troubleshooting, because that's oftentimes, when you're looking at improving performance, maybe there's something that's occurred.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is to really try to narrow down, was there a specific point where things started not behaving as I wanted them to?
Yeah.
And then grab that time to let's say yesterday, look specifically at the previous time to that, and then just start looking through campaigns and ad groups and keywords or shopping, maybe product groups. And really what your audience is, what you're trying to do is just kind of identify, are there any anomalies that really jump out at you? And you will be surprised that there usually do tend to be. We might also look in analytics for something like that as well, on kind of a bigger picture, because that's also one of those things, is be asking yourself, is what are other channels doing, not just our channel? And that's going to help you. If everyone is dropping, that probably is, there's something more industry going on. There's something bigger going on, like a pandemic or something, than just simply the buttons you pushed. You probably want to check out your change history in your Google Ads account too, just to see if you've identified where's the point where things started going wrong. You could look at your change history. Did we change things? But what I found with that is that will typically help me see, oh, okay, it's primarily this campaign, and then that might narrow it down to, oh, these keywords. And what you might do, I mean, you might decide, oh, hey, we need to get more aggressive. You might look in that campaign, and then you might look in auction insights and see, whoa, I'm just brutal on Amazon today here, but like, oh, hey, Amazon, right? Amazon is now much more aggressive in our search impression share than they were before this time. Well, that stinks. At least now we know we can kind of think through what do we do about that, right? You might determine that a competitor product pricing, as you've kind of narrowed it down to this specific key product that you sell, then you might see that now all of a sudden somehow you're the most expensive one in the shopping group, and you can talk to merchandise and figure out if you can lower prices, whatever. So that typically, I think kind of looking at that stuff is pretty important. I do like, in terms of different metrics and stuff to keep an eye on, I do like keeping an eye on things like impression share and click share and search absolute top impression share as well. Those are within the columns there in Google that you can add into your view. Because that often will guide as you're thinking about setting bids, or you're thinking about how much room do you have to grow, how much budget should you invest. You can see how much opportunity you still have for those specific keywords, because they tell you the amount of, let's say, impressions that you are eligible to show for, that you are or are not showing for, and that can give you an insight into those. So those are some. I mean, I keep an eye on the real common ones. Click-through rate and conversion rate and return on ad spend in that as well. But those are some of maybe the other ones that we'll look at.
Sure. So I think, again, maybe pause again and go into those columns. I think getting used to the different data within the columns, or the columns that you need to set up, and getting used to, setting those dashboards up so you've got the right columns, I think is the key. Quite often, well, not always really, I log into accounts and do a screen share with potential clients, and they're just not even aware of the different things you can obviously open up, like so just sort of setting yourself up so you know what to look for and know where to find it is usually half the battle. But yeah, obviously pinpointing that date, that time where there's been a problem, and then drilling back from there and seeing maybe the change history, what's happened, or but then there's that wider picture of industry, massive price change from a competitor maybe that you don't see in the ad account. Obviously you don't see that. You see a drop and then realize 3 weeks later, hopefully not, that someone's doing it 20% cheaper because they've got a better deal from the distributor or whatever it may be. So there's quite a lot more variables with e-com, isn't there, that obviously different pricing structures and rebates and things like that can be taken into account. Some people selling at cost, but then they're getting a 20% kickback in marketing every 3 months or whatever it may be, and working off that. Great. Now, we're coming to the end now, Kirk. So I think that's been brilliant. There's so many great takeaways. I'm actually going to have a re-listen myself. So thank you so much. For the guys that are listening in, what would you recommend around resources for learning more about e-commerce, PPC? Have you got any specific resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, sure. So I get asked this question a lot. So finally, I just wrote a blog post. I didn't really write it. I just listed stuff. So maybe we can get that out in the show notes or something like that. But it's on zatomarketing.com, and it is basically it just has free resources as well as paid resources, and it's courses and books and good blogs to follow. Just really what anyone, and a lot of that stuff is free. So anyone who really wants to put quite a bit of time into it really can learn this stuff, and that's probably the best place to start as well. So if you're interested in smart shopping, I have that smart shopping course on Udemy as well. And I recently wrote a book that's not very, don't think tactical. It's more just kind of my own ponderings, which is what it's called, Ponderings of a PPC Professional. So
we will link all those resources up in the show notes. So thank you for that. So I know you've just mentioned a book, but we always like to also end the episode, I don't know whether you've got another book recommendation, with a book recommendation. What would be your recommendation to our listeners? Doesn't have to be anything to do with PPC. It can be anything at all.
The one I have actually is a PPC related. It is by a brilliant guy named Patrick Gilbert, called Join or Die. And it is, I forget the subtitle of it, Join or Die, something about the automation. And basically, it is kind of thinking through some of the things I was even noting about smart shopping, of wanting to learn this stuff before it's too late, type of deal. And this is Patrick's way of really kind of investigating the machines,
Yep.
algorithms, how they work, and just kind of putting that all together. And it's almost like PPC from like 2021 and beyond, and how to do that well, because it's starting to become more and more different from PPC before 2020. So
That sounds brilliant. That's going to be the next thing I do after this podcast, is to order that straight away. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Kirk. For the guys that are listening that want to find out more about you, reach out to you, where's the best place to do that?
yeah, I'm PPC Kirk everywhere online. So if you want to connect on social, that'd be great. PPC Kirk, or zatomarketing.com is my website.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for being on the show, and I look forward to catching up with you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.